A fraud will be exposed this week in the NFL, and the draft content you need coming at you right now. Not just quarterbacks, but names you must know that'll make your team better for next year. We're doing it. We got all that and more coming up because I'm Jason Fitz, and it's time for Zero Blitz. If you ask me, I'm going to die on one hill. I'm going to die on the hill that the single greatest sporting event of the entire year, yeah, I said it, is the NFL draft. And y'all can miss me with any sort of, well, that's not really, okay, shut up. Here's the reason it's the best of the best. It's the best of the best because it's the season of hope. Every single fan base looks around and says, you know what, my team is not like, I'm a lifelong diehard Raiders fan, as you guys know. And every year I go to the draft, I'm like, this is the year. And then I get my heart ripped out. It's just like Sunday. So with that in mind, and with the final acknowledgement, like I got to be the burden of truth here as we get into Christmas time. Like I'm going to be an honest elf, and I'm going to let everybody know. Your team sucks. You're not going to win the Super Bowl. You got to start looking at the draft. So we're going to do some of that now from the NFL Stock Exchange podcast and NFL draft expert for NBC Sports, Connor Rogers, joining us. Connor, I am so excited to talk about the draft with you because I'm a geek and you're a geek. And between the two of us, we are about to have the sort of conversation that, 20 years ago would have been shoved in lockers. And now, I don't know. We're kind of the cool kids. I feel like we're ahead of the curve here, man.
Jason, we're going to quickly become good friends because that is how my love for the draft has started. Growing up in New York, standing in the stands of the Meadowlands, watching the New York Jets, where your hope is built around the draft every single year. And I look back at it now thinking when I was young, being obsessed with the draft and making a career out of it now. You're right. It's the cool thing. Everybody wants to cover the draft, analyze the draft, talk about the draft. So it's amazing to where it's gone. And obviously I'm a little biased, but I agree with you. It's the best sporting event because of the positivity around it, which feels so rare to have that. And sure, there's also some people with some hard feelings about certain picks, but overall it's a positive event with a ton of excitement and a ton of drama as well.
Yeah, and I think there's this element, like I would implore anybody listening right now, if you're picking something to go to the draft. Like the party around the draft, the fan bases around the draft, the energy around the draft makes it worth it. Now, we'll get to the draft in a second, but you did mention the Meadowlands, so and because I want people to click on the episode, we got to talk about the Jets. Like that just happened. So let's just be transparent here. Are you as tired of Aaron Rodgers as I am?
Man, I get it for a lot of people. I think that the team, covering the team, I do pre and post game for the team, that it's been so bad these last 6 weeks or so that the Rodgers stuff is just kind of in the back burner for people close to the team. But it feels like the national media, it's a massive story because he has a huge platform. He stayed in the picture. I guess for me, this is the honesty, Jason, I never bought in that he was coming back for the Christmas Eve game against the Commanders. I told people my whole thought process was there was a 1% chance that if the Jets were still in the playoff hunt, that he can come back. He would need to come back for the final game of the regular season against New England at 65, 70%, who knows how, and have that game before the wild card round of the playoffs. And then you watch the Jets offensive line, how it's not only fallen apart throughout the season and where it's at now. You really wonder, how would he have even done that? It would have put next year in jeopardy. There was just not a lot of realistic conversations around it, as much as I know he wanted to give the team hope. He obviously loves still being in the spotlight throughout the season, even when he's not playing, which I think is something that has bothered a lot of people as well. But the honesty around it, or the lack of it being realistic, is what always stood out to me from the jump, as much as it was a story that captivated a lot of people, including the Jets fan base.
It's just this moment for me. Like, the glory of the NFL is that the Panthers suck. We don't have to talk about them anymore. The Cardinals suck. We don't have to talk about them anymore. Like, once you get into that level, we're only talking about them on shows like this. We're about to talk about the draft, right? There's a lot into it. I think what just has worn me out is that, A, the Jets shouldn't have been this bad. One quarterback should not make you this bad. And B, they are this bad. And because of the quarterback that's not on the field, we're talking about him. We're not even talking about the right things with the Jets. Like, we should be looking at the head coach and the GM situation and asking what the hell went wrong, instead of obsessing over a guy that was never really, to your point, I think going to be a factor in this season once he went down with an injury. Like, I think there's a real nuanced conversation to have about what the Jets need to do moving forward. We just refuse to have that because we want to talk about Aaron Rodgers in the darkness.
You're absolutely right. It feels like this blinding light in front of what's actually wrong. And this is something that we've talked about more recently in the last couple of weeks. Robert Saleh gets the heat because he's on the podium after every game, and he's not innocent in any of this. No one's denying that. But the foundation of this right now, at least to me, is Joe Douglas's shortcomings with this team. I mean, the fact is he's on a 6-year deal. It's year 5. The offensive line is still a disaster, right? My whole argument to people is Rodgers tore his tore his Achilles 4 plays into the season. How long was he going to survive in any capacity behind this line? Was it going to be week 4? Was it going to be week 8? It could have been a sprained ankle. It could have been a concussion, whatever it may be. He was going to take, for an almost 40-year-old quarterback at the time, he was going to take a lot of hits where the line wasn't good enough. And then the people that like to center in on the coaching staff, well, Joe Douglas hired this coach. When he got here, he was paired with Adam Gase. They got to fire Adam Gase, and then they hired Robert Saleh. And Saleh, for all of the excellence the defense has brought out over the years and building that unit up, has failed to hire an adequate offensive staff, and they've failed to maximize their offensive personnel. And that also goes back to Joe Douglas as well as Robert Saleh. So you're absolutely right. There's deeper conversations with this than just Aaron Rodgers will be back next year and the Jets will be contenders again. That is, as we sit here right now, they have a contending defense. They have good special teams, but right now they don't have an offense, even with Aaron Rodgers. And things will be better with Aaron Rodgers, but they don't have an offense that makes them a contender. And a lot of those conversations are, like you said, much more nuanced and complex and are more important than, the sound bites you get from him every single week.
Yeah, I think what frustrates me is it's never going to end. It's just never going to end.
No.
I mean, it's going to go all the way through the offseason and the draft and then into next season, next summer. And this is why I drink. Okay. I also drink because the NFL draft usually breaks my heart. Let's have an honest moment. Okay. You've been covering the draft for a while. I've been covering the draft for a while. Last year, I think most of us knew going in there were maybe 15 first-round draft pick prospects, right? Like, we knew that last year felt there were some big names at the beginning, but not necessarily a great deep draft when it came to, like, oh, my God, first-round grades. The year before felt like it was sort of a draft. I feel like the draft this year is particularly important because this is neither of those. This is a draft where whether you have needs at quarterback, which we'll get to, or wide receiver, which we'll get to, or offensive line, defensive, like there are studs in this draft all the way across. Like this is one of those years where if you're picking in the 20s, you should still be able to get a high value first round, oh my God, this guy can contribute. I feel like this is a turnaround draft. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. I mean, you summed it up perfectly this year compared to the last couple of years. I think what can define a draft from the big picture, not for the people really deep in it necessarily like we get, is the 1, star power at the top, and then 2, star power at certain positions. And those positions often with the draft are quarterback, of course, and then really, to me, when I think of the draft, wide receiver also as well. I go back to the year that we had Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Smith all at the top of that draft, and the shuffling of how they would go and how things would turn out, and all 3 have worked out quite well, to be honest with you. But with this draft right here, you have the top thing for any draft in terms of drama is 2 top quarterbacks and the arguing over who should go first. I go all the way back to thinking of Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, the arguments that were had over them in that year. Those arguments are going to exist between Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. I know a lot of people on the Caleb Williams side. I know a lot of smart people, including people that work in the league, on the Drake Maye side. This is a lot closer than people realize, where it was a surprise to me looking at some betting odds how far off Drake Maye was. I mean, all the way at plus 250, plus 300. I don't want to say it's a pick, but I'm saying it's closer, and it's going to get a lot closer as these months go by. Then you look at wide receiver. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a build-a prospect, right? He's got the obviously the pedigree, being the son of Marvin Harrison, but he's 6'4". He's got size. He's got speed. He's refined. He has production over 2 years in the Big Ten. So he plays extremely as hard as anyone you'll see. But also Malik Neighbors under him doesn't get enough shine because of how good Marvin Harrison is, where Malik Neighbors is the number 1 wide receiver in almost any other draft class. That's what's crazy about this. And then you have your meat and potatoes of the draft, the offensive linemen that this league needs right now. You watch the NFL every single Sunday. how many star quarterbacks have we lost for the entire season or for a long period of time? The lack of star talent and depth at the offensive line position is hurting the long-term product later in the season. And this draft has maybe 5 first-round tackles. So this is a phenomenal draft. It's deep at premium positions. It has the quarterback drama at the top, and it has the Ferraris at wide receiver that we all love to watch and talk about going into fantasy football.
I love the way you mentioned the wide receiver position. I want to start there. Everybody wants me to start a quarterback. Calm down. All right, we'll get to quarterbacks in a second. I want to start wide receiver, mostly so I can humble brag and remind the world I'm a Biletnikoff Award voter, but also because this year, I'm just throwing out all my resume.
I'm jealous of
this
that.
Year, well, the crazy thing is you mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. The most incredible stat to me is 0, and that's the number of drops he had this year. 0. He was not credited with a single drop. But to the point you just made, I agonized over that decision. I talked to receivers that played in the NFL and college to make sure that I was seeing it the right way because I thought Neighbors had every bit the season that Marvin Harrison Jr. had. And I didn't want to let name recognition, brand recognition of Harrison influence the way I voted on the award. I say that to say, to your point, I think Neighbors is every bit today as can't miss as Marvin Harrison Jr. is, which is stunning to say. And then I always look, I'm not comping the player. I'm just comping the value, right? Look at what Jamar Chase did for the Bengals. You cannot tell me that adding somebody like a Marvin Harrison Jr. won't make, like if you buy the mocks right now and we believe that according to Tankathon, Arizona's picking 3rd. If Arizona feels like they have Kyler Murray locked in and they're happy there, my God, they add Marvin Harrison Jr. That's a home run. If you buy any of these mocks that have the Bears suddenly taking a quarterback at 1 and then somehow landing Marvin Harrison Jr., that is that's the sort of combo that changes the entire trajectory of Chicago for the next 10 years.
It completely does. And this is a great conversation to have because I remember I wrote a mock draft not that long ago for NBC, and I had that exact scenario. I had the Bears taking a quarterback at 1, and then they were picking 5th at the time, and Marv was gone, but I took Neighbors. And a lot of Bears fans respectfully just wrote back. They're like, oh, this is interesting. It's not a really big wide receiver. Does he complement DJ Moore? Is he that good to warrant this kind of selection? Because all we've heard about is Marvin Harrison Jr. or bust. And the comparison I gave them was, look at how Miami creates space with speed with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. They tried out 2 wide receivers that are not 6 feet tall. They're not 200 pounds, and it doesn't matter. They create the most space in the league, and they can play quick game by what they could do after the catch. They could play vertical game by what they could do over the top. Malik Neighbors and DJ Moore, to me, would be trying in a way, it's not the same level of speed, but it's still really impressive to replicate that in the NFC, where you have guys that could take screens to the house. You have guys that can win over the top, but they're also really good route runners where the full route tree is in play as well, and they make life so much easier on your quarterback. So Neighbors is a special player. I love that scenario for Chicago where they're a team that they've been trying to figure it out on offense for many years. What they do with Fields or what they don't do with Fields is a whole nother conversation. But the bottom line is whoever is under center needs that kind of weaponry to really maximize their pass game. And then you go back to Arizona with Marvin Harrison Jr. It's just such a layup, right? You have Kyler in place. You have a blue chip, kind of wide receiver prospect that you feel only comes around every couple of years. The closest thing I've seen in terms of just overall talent is Chase. I loved Chase that year. I didn't have any questions about him. Feel the same way about Marvin Harrison Jr. Like you said, it can change your offense on a dime. And Arizona has some talent on offense where he's not coming in. It's like, man, good luck. Like, you have Kyler under center. You took Paris Johnson last year that we've seen flashes from. Hollywood Brown has had a tough go of it since Kyler's been back, but he could still play. Trey McBride has been an incredible player in his second year in the NFL. So what those wide receivers, the bump they can give for you is really underappreciated during their rookie seasons right now.
I also think, it's fair, and I used to joke with Field Yates all the time at ESPN, that we could turn it into a shot game. Every time we're like, oh, it's the best wide receiver class I've ever seen, everybody be drunk every year. I say that with deference to what we're seeing this year because I believe the 2 guys we're talking about right now rise above any of what we've been talking about. As much as we've been saying every year, it feels like this is a great wide receiver class. These 2 guys are flat out better, in my opinion, than what we've been seeing over the last several years out of stacked wide receiver classes. And we have seen immediate impact. Like this, the way offenses have changed, the way that they've moved everything to try and make sure that they can have immediate success from the quarterback, the way they try and get the ball out of everybody's hands quickly. Young wide receivers have a better impact today in the NFL than they did 5, 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's a little bit of a mindset change for fans. Like, size isn't the number one thing. Like, you don't have to be huge to be the number one wide receiver. Like, the number one thing is get off. Can you get off and get open quickly? And both of these guys can do that.
That's exactly right. Neighbors is so explosive. I mean, you look at how LSU used him. They would manufacture touches to him, have him come across the formation in motion and just pitch him the ball, literally, and it would be a 30-yard score. They would throw to him over the top. They would have him run slants. They would set up pick routes for him. I mean, he was just so lethal before, at the catch, and after the catch. We know Marv is the same exact way, a little bit different beast in terms of contested catch and how he handles traffic. I think back to the catch against Michigan where he draws the pass interference, his one arm and his hips are being tackled, and he catches the ball with one hand. I mean, that's just the spectacular nature of Marvin Harrison Jr. But even beyond those two, I just released the top 75 big board for NBC. 5 wide receivers in the top 20, 14 in the top 75. The depth of this class is absurd, and it has speed, it has size, it has guys with polish, it has guys that are raw but have that size and athleticism and length that you want to kind of get that ball of clay and mold them into your offense and have them stretch the field. I'm with you. People get really beaten down by, oh, it's another great wide receiver class. Like, is this just what football is now? Because it's 7-on-7 and every kid wants to play wide receiver. But no, this one is unique because of every box it checks. The blue chippers at the top that, in my opinion, should both be top 5 picks. Then you have the fact you have depth in round 1, but then you go back to that well on day 2 and you're like, man, I'm going to go draft a starter in the 3rd round. That's special stuff to me.
All right. So with that being said, now, fine, I hear everybody yelling through their speakers right now, say, get to the quarterbacks, get to the quarterbacks. I'm going to pose a different question to you. We'll get to Caleb versus Drake in a second. And I think there's a compelling conversation there, but let's start with the obvious here. I'm looking at Tankathon right now, and you have Chicago 1, New England 2. I'll take Arizona out of the equation because of the money for Kyler Murray at 3. Then you have Washington at 4. You have the Giants at 6, the Jets at 7. I spy out of the first 7 picks, even with Chicago having 2 of them, 5 teams that could justify a move at the quarterback position. For that reason, specifically, I want to start here. I don't care what anybody tells me Chicago could, should, or might do. I don't think there's any amount of draft capital in the world that will move anybody up into the top 2. It would be absolutely asinine, in my opinion, for Chicago or New England to move out of 1 or 2 and to walk away from the quarterback. So I don't care. For everybody that says, oh, we're going to trade up, I don't like if I sat here and heard a report tomorrow that my beloved Raiders were offering 6 years of first-round draft picks to move up, I don't think Chicago or New England would take them. I don't think there's any trade scenario that takes quarterback out of 1 and 2. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not. At least for me. I've been very stern about this, and it's a whole debate with Bears fans because they've seen flashes from Fields. I think the timeline is an issue there where his inconsistencies, although he's been much better since he's been back, but the fact that Poles wants to draft his own guy, right? And the fact is Fields' timeline in terms of when you have to pay him might not align with how they're building this thing. Now, whether you agree or disagree, Caleb Williams and Drake Maye are being held in a very, very high regard that I think Chicago, big picture, would look at it and going, it's great that Fields is playing well because now we can get maybe day 2 capital for him that we didn't think we would be able to get. We're also going to take our guy and reset because we didn't get to draft a quarterback yet at number 1, who we think is a high-end quarterback prospect. And then we're going to be able to surround him with a better infrastructure that maybe we didn't get right for Fields, right? It's, in a way, a little bit reminiscent of when, Joe Douglas came in and the Jets were holding on to Darnold and everybody thought they would keep Darnold and not draft another quarterback after that. And at the end of the day, GMs often want their own guys when there's a lot of questions and it's viewed as a good quarterback class, whether people agree or not. When you look at New England, that's a franchise that really needs to turn the page. They're probably going to have a new head coach. They need a new promising quarterback under center. There's not a price, I agree with you, that warrants these teams moving out, because what is the alternative? For the Bears, okay, you move forward with Fields, long conversation. New England, there is no other conversation. You're not going out in free agency and getting a guy that you think is going to hold the fort. You're not turning back to Mac Jones and trying to figure out that. This is a total new movement, in my opinion, with New England, where they need to be very careful about winning any more games. Because if you see a scenario where let's say Arizona somehow fell into that number 2 pick, then you have an auction that we might not see that kind of like the capacity of that auction in a long time, where the price is turning into 3 1s, 2 2s, a notable player, like all of the, just to go up a couple spots, because like you said, you don't even have to move that far back if you're picking at number 2 if you were Arizona. I mean, Washington, okay, maybe they move forward to Howell and take a tackle, but at least they call, right? The Giants and Jets are in very interesting spots. You obviously have a team like Atlanta that's not far away at number 10. So, yeah, I think there's no price to put on having a slot in 1 and 2 this year. And maybe you can even say the same thing about 3 with Arizona, because how special Marvin Harrison Jr. is.
Yeah, and that's where it gets, because even frankly, I mean, I would love for everything to be easy for Arizona. They keep telling us they love Kyler Murray. Awesome. I love that you love him. And I realize that there's a lot of money spent. Man, if you can start, we have to stop looking at the quarterback position in my thought process as $1 amount. The player, we have to look at the position as a dollar amount. So, okay, maybe Kyler Murray costs a ton of money, but honestly, if you have to swallow up more money and bench him, trade him, do whatever you have to do, pay part of that cash out, you have to trade him after June 1st, whatever you have to do. If you have the opportunity to reset, like, here's the thing. You know what you have at some level with these guys. You know what you have. Like, Justin Fields is not the next, let's insert Hall of Fame quarterback here, right? He's not. He looks pretty good, but he's not Hall of Famer, right? Kyler Murray looks pretty good when he's been healthy, but he's not sitting out. He's not Mahomes. Right. So at some point, what you don't want to do is get stuck overpaying for, you can't pay a 7, 9 money. You just can't do that. And even if these guys end up being, that's exactly what Arizona did. I don't care anymore. Like, if I'm running the Cardinals, I don't care the sins of the past. I don't care about that. I'm going to look today. If I have the number 2 overall pick and I can reset at the quarterback position flat out, if that guy's better, I'll figure out the finances. Somehow, some way, I'll figure out the finances. I'm not going to pass on a generational quarterback. And when you talk about, like, we hear all these comps all the time, but Caleb gets the Mahomes comps, Drake gets the Justin Herbert comps, or the, you know, the Andrew Luck comps, right? Like, we hear all these comps. At some point, it's also about just rolling the dice. If you know that you don't have an 8 or a 9 at the quarterback position and you got the chance to draft one in this league, I think you have to take that chance.
I think you do too, because that can keep your job for the next 20 years in that kind of scenario, right? Like, you hit on that guy, the picture always becomes easier in terms of putting the puzzle together. It's like, okay, I mean, you look at the Chiefs are one example because of Mahomes, but you could do it for a couple teams, even like the Bengals, for instance, with Burrow, all these teams that have these great quarterbacks. Now the Texans with CJ Stroud, that's a good one because it's more recent and the picture is so clear for them. They can go into this offseason and say, we love Tank Dell. We like Nico Collins, but we're going to go get another big-time playmaker now. We're going to put more resources into that, or we're going to try to beef up this part of our defense. Because under center, like, there's no questions here. We know we got a dude. We got a dude that's a top 8 quarterback. He can go drag us through to win games. We're not constantly lifting him up all the time. As a GM, it not only brings you job security, but it also brings you an identity of how to fill out your blueprint and your team. So that's why it's worth the swing, because life is so hard in the NFL if you're a middle of the pack. Look what the Saints had to do with Derek Carr. You pay him all of that money, and quite frankly, if your roster is not great, how far is a Derek Carr going to get you, right? That's just one example. Look at the Falcons right now. The Falcons are a team that they spent a lot of veteran money for the defense, and the defense is finally in a much better place this year. They have weapons. Drake London can play. Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, like, these guys can play. They are so handicapped by the quarterback position that it's honestly ruined most of their season in a division that they should have cakewalked to first place. So that is why ultimately at the end of the day, when you have the chance to take the swing for the quarterback, you do it, because if you do hit, your picture is just so much clearer of how to get to the promised land.
Especially when you're in a league where you're competing with a young Patrick Mahomes and a young Josh Allen and a young Lamar Jackson. Like, this isn't Brady versus Manning late in their careers. Like, you got a bunch of guys right now that are under 30 that have 10 years left in this league that are great, right? And so if you're going to compete in that world, like look, and it's not always about wins and losses. Like, also, I'll use a dating analogy, but, like, man, if you've been dating her for a really long time and she's like, marry me, and you're like, I don't know. Like, there's probably a reason you don't know, right? Like,
yeah, you got your answer.
You're sitting here with Justin Fields and you're like, man, I know we've been together for a while, and, like, it's the next move and it's the right thing for us to do, but I don't really feel ready for that. Like, there's a reason, right? And, look at the Chargers. Chargers haven't won anything. But they knew clearly that they got their guy. Even though their guy did not win when he needed to win in Week 18 to get into the playoffs, he didn't win in the playoffs. There was never the conversation like, it's like, nope, his contract is up. We are going to pay Justin Herbert because we have Justin Herbert. Like, they understood. They had the guy. They put a ring on it. They're fine. The fact that that hasn't happened with Chicago, that means something to me. And if you're in that situation and you still want to see other people, it's probably time to see other. Let her go, and you go your own way also.
Exactly. And for Chicago, it gets everybody on a timeline where you look at it and go, okay, this is the GM's guy. Now, what they do with the coaching staff, like, that is a whole nother different question to me, because that's a really big decision, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Their defense has done a lot of right things, especially since the trade deadline. They have a defensive-minded head coach. So we'll see what happens with the offensive side of things. But yeah, you want to swing big if you're Chicago. I think it almost becomes amplified in the NFC, because imagine if you get a top 8 quarterback in the NFC right now, compared to the AFC, where you said it. You have Herbert, you have Mahomes, you have Burrow, you have Lamar Jackson. Trevor Lawrence, I don't think, has lived up to the billing of what we thought he would be, but we know he's still a franchise guy right now. And then you have Miami's offense. You look at the NFC, if you have an elite quarterback, you're worried about, okay, the greatness of Kyle Shanahan and how they built the Niners. The Eagles, of course, right now. The Cowboys, to an extent as well. The Lions have been very up and down. But the pathway, when you have an elite quarterback in that conference, you're almost guaranteed to go to the playoffs for as long as that guy is there. You just got to find that guy that can lead you there every year. But it's just that conference in terms of the quarterback picture is so much more, it's desirable to get one because you feel like he can potentially run the NFC for a long time.
And I want to address the 49ers part of this draft conversation because everybody always says, oh, you don't need a quarterback, Brock Purdy. Okay, fine.
1 in a million.
But let me at least say this. The other side, you're right, 1 in a million. And then the other side of this, and I think this is an important one. Okay, you're swinging big, trying to hit with the first overall pick. Fine. You got a chance. You might not get there. If you're going to trade out of that pick, then you better hope that you can emulate not just the fact that San Francisco didn't take a quarterback, but that they nailed everything else. You need suddenly an organization like the Bears that hasn't drafted particularly well to nail every single piece of equity they get in return for the first overall pick. So like now instead, hey man, you've got the first pick. You walked up to the buffet table. You can have whatever you want. You're going to bank that instead of taking your chance with everything at your feet, you're now going to walk back up to the table when a bunch of it's picked over, but you're going to get those 5 selections all right. Like that to me, I'll go back to when the Raiders traded for John Gruden and everybody said, or they traded John Gruden, I should say, and they got a couple extra first rounds. And it was like, oh, these extra first round. The number of times I've seen the Raiders have 3 first-round draft picks and get nothing out of it because like bad teams don't draft well. So if you're the Bears, if you're trading out of the number 1 overall pick and you're passing on somebody that could be a generational quarterback, you better hope to hell that you hit on every single pick that you get in return. And that just statistically never happens.
That's the thing. The probability of it is just, it doesn't exist, right? And it's going beyond, even if you think you are a good scouting department, you're like, hey, we know how to scout for this scheme and we hit on this kind of guy. There are a million different things that can go wrong in the draft. It's truly Murphy's Law. You can have a guy that it doesn't go right medically. You might have missed on the character and that doesn't work out. You might be in a situation that ultimately he plateaued at college and the trajectory didn't keep going the right way. And you got an average starter, but you use the 13th pick on the draft for an average starter that you can go out and get in free agency for $7 to $8 million. So that's the problem, is that people become obsessed with the ceiling of a draft pick because in theory it's limitless, but when in reality the floor of one is so much more dangerous to become, obsessive over. So yeah, I think that's a huge problem as well, that, hey, we have all these picks, but what did we end up with at the end of the day that was an actual game changer for us in our franchise?
Okay, so let's look at the quarterbacks because I'm with you. I've talked to some smart people. I hear the Drake Maye stuff. I've actually put a little cash on Drake Maye to go first overall because it just makes sense. There's money to be made. Where do you think, when you look at these two quarterbacks, who has the edge?
Yeah, this is going to be really close. I mean, almost at the point of a pick 'em. And it might come down to just, let's say the Bears are picking number 1, what they prefer. With Caleb Williams, you are going to get the spectacular out of structure plays while he's still growing as an in rhythm timing passer, the comfort of just hanging in the pocket and playing within the offense. That is not, in my opinion, at an NFL level yet. But if he grows into that, you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, because the spectacular he can do when the play breaks down, whether it's the athleticism, whether it's the ability to scramble and keep his eyes upfield, he can really hit any point of the field with alternate arm angles and with touch. It's an insane arm. And then when you look at Drake Maye, it's not that he can't play out of structure, but he's somebody that is more willing, I think, at times to play in structure. And I think he's also somebody that, you know, when you look at it, it's not that he plays mistake free. I think that gets mixed up with both of these guys. Drake Maye still makes bad decisions, and it's more seeing the field. I feel like with Caleb Williams, it's a lot of holding the ball and running around way too long. With Drake Maye, it's in the pocket, but he'll take chances against double coverage, triple coverage by just trying to fit a ball in because he has such a strong arm. They're both good athletes. Drake Maye is bigger, significantly bigger in this league where guys are dropping out every single week from taking these hits. Some guys will value that at a very, very high level. So there's a lot to go through with these guys. I think they both throw with great touch at all three levels. The ball placement's super, super impressive. Just getting to sit down with both of them is going to be a huge part of this process, because it feels like from a PR standpoint, it wasn't a great year for Caleb Williams. It felt like he was basically on a track to be a surefire number one pick. And now the fact we're even having the conversations, it's not that he had a bad year, but everything at USC just felt like it was a bit off. While Drake Maye, it almost went under the radar while he was playing at UNC. It wasn't, he didn't have that same kind of spotlight because he wasn't projected to be the number one pick. So I think this is going to be really, really close. I think both guys are going to have to grow through their warts because they both make plenty of mistakes, whether it is the fumbles, which both of them do a lot, whether it is trying to fit the ball in between defenders because of the confidence. But the talent that they possess is the reason we're even having this conversation, that they're both going to go 1 and 2.
Your interview point is a really key one here, right? Because
massive.
The funny part about this is I don't want to speak in stereotypes, but Drake seems to come across like every quarter. You know, it's like that. Drake Maye isn't easy. Right? Yeah. He's just that easy. Says all the right things, all the right ways. You know, I already can hear the cliches coming out of like, you can see my guy loves football, right? Like anybody doesn't at this level, right? But there is some element of Caleb, who was such a huge superstar this fall. Like, you look at the number of TV commercials he was in and the fact that he was truly the face of college football early on in the season. And I've heard people around the league mumbling that, you know, well, let's see how he relates to his teammates. It's like, okay, now I got to fault a kid for going out and right. I got to be clear. If you want to dock Caleb Williams because he held the ball too long and didn't make the plays on schedule that you wanted him to make, fine. That I respect that. If you want to dock him because he paints his fingernails, just shut the hell up. That's the big thing for me. But I think the personality interviews are going to play to some of those conversations.
They definitely are. It's like anything else, Jason, right? You sit down and you talk to someone and you vibe with them, or you like them, or you're like, hey, you might be a really good person, but like maybe we just aren't cohesive together. So, at the end of the day, I think a lot of teams are just going to absolutely love these guys. And that's why if you don't even go number one, then you go number two. It's like, at the end of the day, who cares? And I think, there is so much to unpack here for teams. And I think the thing I want to emphasize with them is that they are not perfect, right? My number one player in this draft is Marvin Harrison Jr. My number two player in this draft is Olu Fashanu. Then Caleb Williams at 3. I love his talent. I do believe in him. I want to see him go into the right situation. And then Drake Maye at 5. So both in the top 5, both great. Both need to cut down on some of the mistakes that a lot of young, confident players make. Both need to see the field a little better within structure. With Caleb, when you run around that long, it's easier a little bit to see the field out of the pocket. But within the pocket, whether it's the lurking safeties over the top, whether it is the blend of coverages and falling into the trap of 2 or 3 defenders are there, they're not perfect prospects, but they're really, really good in a draft that when you look at the top 6 to 7 guys, they are as blue chip gets.
I want to go back to your number 2 prospect because it speaks to something I've been screaming. If your team takes a fat guy in the first round of this draft, you won. Like, Olu Fashanu is somebody that a lot of people are sitting in the Gesundheit, right? Like, people don't even know who the hell he is. So what do you love about the tackle out of Penn State?
I mean, number one, just like Marv at wide receiver, this dude's built in a lab. He's 6'6", he's 315 pounds. It's clean weight. He just has a perfect offensive tackle body in terms of the athleticism, the length. When you see him get into his pass sets, the feet are just tremendous. He's got the feet of a tight end while playing tackle, a guy that's not undersized at tackle. You see a lot of guys that get to college and they show up to school as a tight end and then they put on a ton of weight, they move to tackle. And then when you're scouting and going through all your research, you're like, oh, it makes sense. He used to be a tight end. But when you look at Olu, he's just the perfect tackle prospect in terms of pass pro, right? It's the athleticism. He always dictates the reps in pass pro because of how explosive he is. Like, he's always the first one off the ball, and you see how comfortable he is, the lateral quickness to mirror pass rushers. He's got the anchor strength when they try to push him into the pocket. He just doesn't really get beat a lot ever. It's not to giving up a sack. He doesn't get beat a lot. The one thing I wanted to see him improve on from summer scouting into this year was run blocking, because at times he doesn't have the drive blocking strength off the line of scrimmage. He might get a little over anxious with his athleticism and zone blocking and misses targets. And I think he really improved this year a lot. This is a guy that got more playing time, second-year starter, stronger, and just more dialed in the run game. So when you have a guy that's lights out in pass pro, which is the ultimate weapon in the NFL right now, and he's getting closer to being a plus in the run game, that's a special player and an anchor for your offensive line for the next decade.
Yeah, day one starter, 10-year plug and play. He is your tackle. You answer one of the biggest questions you have in your team. He's going to be very, very rich for a very, very long time because he is spectacular. Like,
he's a pro. Just the ultimate pro.
Before I do definitely want to go through a few other prospects, but I have to get one more quarterback in because, again, in case I haven't made it clear, my favorite team needs a quarterback. So where are we on Jaden Daniels? Because, I feel like the stock is rising, not just because of the Heisman. The stock's rising because of Lamar. The stock is rising because of the way the game's played. So I'm going to go a couple places here. But first, in your mind, where does Jaden Daniels land in this draft?
From people I've talked to lately, and this is very, very recently, I think he's going to climb all the way into the top 12 of this draft. I really, really do. I think that he's had a magnificent year for LSU. It's the playmaking ability. He's not like when we look at Caleb and Drake, they're scramblers, right? Jaden's a runner. There's a big difference in that. He's a guy that when he wants to run, I'm not taking the 8 yards in front of me. Oh, it's 8 yards in front of me. Then I'm going to juke out the linebacker or the safety, and then I want another 12 yards. Now, there's a bad side to that. I haven't seen many prospects take hits like this guy, and he's slender. He's very, very slender. I mean, it truly, like, his feet go up in the air sometimes. He's got to learn how to slide, or else it's going to be a reality check at the NFL level. And you want to see this guy stay healthy. And, a guy like Lamar and Kyler, to an extent, they were masters of protecting their bodies while being runners in college. You just can't get a hand on them. Jaden just keeps on running to a fault almost. But it's pretty special running ability. He has 2 first-round wide receivers, so you see the deep ball on tape all the time. He could throw it down the field with touch, with timing, whether it's to Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas Jr., another receiver in this draft that I think is worthy of being a top 25 pick. He's got speed, he's got length, so you get to see the vertical passing ability. Now, where I want to see him get better, not as much anticipation throws as the other guys, where it's take my drop and I'm throwing the ball before the route even truly breaks off. I'm going to wait, he's open, okay, I'm going to throw it, because if he's not open, I'm such a gifted runner that I'll figure out a play anyway. And the good thing about that is when you have players like that, they could buy themselves more time to develop because they're so gifted at running that it gives them a calling card and deep passing. And I want to take that away from him that, okay, we're going to run a vertical offense that puts a lot of pressure on the back end of the defense. There's a lot of pressure on the front end because I can run. Now, if I can threaten at all in the intermediate game with that timing in my drops, I'm going to be a top quarterback. But that's a big question that not a lot of guys fulfill that answer. It's a very hard thing to get better at. He's my quarterback 4. I have him at, I think, player 24 right now. I'm not as high as it seems like the league is on him. I like Michael Penix a little better. I know he has medical questions to answer. He's not the same level of athlete, but he's the opposite. Everything with Penix is pre-snap, read the coverage, see the field. I know exactly where I'm going to throw this football. And when my wide receiver turns around, the football is in his face mask. So it's just a matter of what you like, what you prefer. The game is gravitating towards the playmakers and runners, but I don't think the art of the drop back passer that has incredible IQ and vision is lost yet. Those guys have a lot of success too. So, 4 first-round quarterbacks to me between Caleb, Drake, Michael Penix, and Jaden Daniels, depending on medical for Penix.
Jaden, stylistically, I have a hard time seeing Jaden passed by the Falcons. Like, look at who the Falcons like. Look at, presuming Arthur Smith is still there, look at what the Falcons like at quarterback. And it just feels like, hey, if you had Desmond Ridder, here's what you hope Desmond Ridder would turn into, right? Like, there's an element of mobility, ability to see the field, ability to move the ball around. Like, I have a hard time seeing him make a pass there. Michael Penix Jr. is a very interesting, I think some people saw highlights of him running, and they think of him as a running quarterback. That is the exact opposite. Like, he's definitely not that kind of guy. So it'll be interesting to see. And the I don't know, left-handed quarterbacks, the ball just looks funny when it comes. It just looks funny. It looks funny.
And he throws it like a Nerf ball. I mean, he throws missiles. So it looks even more wild to see a lefty where, like, we watch Tua, right? And it's, Tua throws with a lot of touch, and it's almost like a changeup. With Penix, it's a lefty that literally throws piss missiles all around the field.
You are 1,000% right with that. Okay, so let's get some other, just because everybody listening is worried about where they pick and what they've got. So give me some guys that you just love, that you want the world to know about. Just some rapid fire, like who's somebody that stands out? We've talked wide receivers. We've talked one offensive lineman with Olu. Give me another offensive lineman that people should be just stoked out of their minds for.
Joe Alt from Notre Dame is a freak. I mean, he's a skyscraper. So you see a tackle that's 6'9", but he plays low. He plays with pretty good leverage for that height. The difference between him and Olu, while he doesn't have the athleticism and pass pro that Olu has, this dude blows guys off the ball. Like, he just completely drives them off the ball. He completely takes them out of the play. He's a nasty, nasty run blocker and good enough in pass pro. I mean, the pass pro is very clean over the years. 3-year starter. So I look at all. He's a surefire top 10 pick. And then the thing is, it's deeper than that. Like J.C. Latham from Alabama, he's a 350-plus pound tackle. But when he gets those meat hooks on you, he literally throws guys out of the play into his own teammates. He had a lot of penalties 2 years ago, and it feels like he's cleaned up some of his game this year. I think he goes in the top 15. Another one at wide receiver, I mean, that doesn't get enough hype in this class because Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, all these guys get all this love. Troy Franklin from Oregon, he can fly. Like he's going to run a 4.3 at a minimum. He's got length. He's explosive. He's a leaper. He's an acrobat. Everybody looks at this Oregon offense and they're like, oh, Bo Nix and Bucky Irving, and they can run. And Troy Franklin, without him, I don't know where they would be because of the way he stretches the field. He's such a interesting threat with that speed. He's an underrated player. So this class, man, it's so exciting because of the playmaking talent, because of the conversations around the quarterback. And then, like I said, the offensive line, you said if your team drafts one, like, feel good about the draft, that steady feeling of, hey, I got a plug and play starter that can alter my run game, that can keep my quarterback clean. That's going to make our team so much better.
I mean, I've been hearing about Joe Alt for a minute, but that's because Mike Golick Jr. makes sure that he crams every offensive lineman from the Fighting Irish down our throats. What about pass rushers? Because everybody's obsessed with pass rushers. Is there somebody out there that you think is like an epic guy?
I think they're so interesting because they're grouped closely together. I think Dallas Turner from Alabama can be the epic guy. He's had such a good trajectory where you turn on the 2022 tape, he's the smallest guy in the front seven, and you're like, all right, now you got to out-athlete everybody, and he usually can. You turn on 2023, bigger, stronger, plays with his hand in the dirt, can play standing up, can peel back in zone coverage. I like him standing up over guards and centers like the Cowboys do with Micah Parsons because he's just a freak show athlete. He's too quick. But the fact he's gotten stronger, he's someone that at the end of this thing, I have him at 11th overall right now. If he went in the top 6, I'd be like, yeah, I would bet on him too. A young player, super successful. Alabama develops pass rushers on the edge like no other. But you look at Latu from UCLA and Jared Verse from Florida State. They play with a little bit more refinement and polish, hand placement, knockback power. They have a lot of different moves in their arsenal. They're top 15 picks. They can play the run. They'll set a hard edge. They'll really drive tackles off the ball and hold their point of attack. So this is an edge class that, I got 3 in the top 15. They are, once again, very gifted pass rushers that are well coached up, that they've all gotten so much better year after year. I mean, Latu at UCLA, he was medically retired by Washington 3 years ago with a neck injury. The fact that he came back, revived his career. It's almost Jalen Phillips-esque, right? That you look at it and go, man, the last 2 years, he's been the best pass rusher in the country. You see cross chop, long arm, spin move. Every move is in his arsenal. He won't test like a Dallas Turner or a Chop Robinson, but the tape it's tier 1 tape, but you can't ask for more over the last 2 years of a sample size of tape.
Yeah, I think all the pass rushers this year, like there's some quality there, but I think development's a key word. Like there are little yeah buts on a lot of them versus somebody that, man, he decided to come back and just go for it this year. And the number of times it felt like he was triple, quadruple teamed. I mean, they're just throwing everything at the kid. So, like, I'd be interested to see if there isn't an explosion from him when he goes into the pros and he has a better opportunity. Like, he feels like the sort of kid that year one's going to give you 6 sacks and you're like, yeah, I see the potential. And then year 2, it suddenly blows up to me.
100%. Verse has a special story. He went to Albany. That's actually where I went to school.
Oh, that's fun.
And he transfers to Florida State, which is a massive jump. He gets to Albany as really a no-star recruit kind of guy, dominates the conference. I think during COVID is when he put on a ton of weight, and you just see the work ethic, like what he's turned his body into, the hand strength. He goes to Florida State, and everyone's like, all right, let's see what this kid from Albany did. Like, he dominated Albany. Good luck in the ACC. He was lights out, like you said, 2 years ago for Florida State. Nobody could block him. And then he stayed. He's a very well thought out kind of guy. He's intellectual. He didn't feel the need to rush to the NFL. He wanted to come into the NFL as a pro-ready player. And I think he is, because he earns the pass rush reps. Like, you watch him on first and second down against the run, and he'll play dirty and not dirty in a bad way. Like, he'll play a lunch pail game. He'll grind out teams against the run. Then it's third down, pin your ears back. Okay, I'm going to knock your tackle into your quarterback because I have that violent hand strength and I get off the ball. So versus, if I was looking for safe in this draft, Jared Verse is right at the top of that conversation.
I also love the fact that he was really discovered. Florida State discovered him by watching tape on Syracuse. And because he had just destroyed Syracuse in the game, they were like, they were getting ready for Syracuse. They're like, whoever that kid is, we want him. So, like, good for him for, like, you just never know the moment that's going to get you discovered, and to have that be it. It's just such an unbelievable story. He
destroyed Matthew Bergeron, who went on to be a second-round pick for the Falcons.
That's crazy.
It's like, damn, who is this guy?
Do you? Is there a corner out there that, I mean, last year's corner class was deep, right? Like, we knew that, but it was like, your favorite flavor of ice cream a little bit last year. So is there a corner out there that you love this year?
That's the one area where the class drops off because it's so hard to meet those expectations. Witherspoon was special. I thought Gonzalez was special. This class is okay. Nate Wiggins from Clemson has length. He has athleticism. He's got leaping ability. He's got good eyes in zone. I think he'll be the first one taken. Cooper DeJean is where the conversations are going to be really fascinating to watch out of Iowa. I mean, he is the best tackling corner in the entire draft. He's somebody that, yes, he could play safety because he is so good at zone coverage and he has such ball hawking skills. But I think he's a good athlete that can survive outside as a perimeter corner. I really do. But if you draft Cooper DeJean, he's kind of this, not Swiss Army knife, but more of this game-changing weapon that can run with the big tight ends that play the slot. Like, I need a guy that's 6'1", 210 pounds that can run and play the ball. Who's going to go cover Travis Kelce or Sam Laporta or Mark Andrews? The answer is Cooper DeJean. Who's going to, when the team goes into 12 and 13 personnel, who's the defensive back that can play in the box and get off of blocks and tackle? It's Cooper DeJean. Like, you can't say that about a lot of secondary players. So I think DeJean will be well liked and well valued in this draft at whatever position you want to call it.
Yeah, I just hope he goes somewhere that has the mindset of putting him in a situation to be successful. Guys like that are so beholden to where they end up, the coaching
Isaiah
they get.
Simmons?
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%. That's the best example, right? Like, guys that can do a million things, then they get to the pros and they're asked to do the one thing that they're not the best at, or they're put in so many different places quickly, they can't succeed. I know that you always succeed. This has been fun. We got to do this again before the draft, just because I love talking about it. And as we started this whole thing, and as I'll end it now, I think the most incredible portion of all of this is for guys like us. You sit here and you watch and you watch and you watch. And the craziest part about it is right now, the gap from where most of our favorite teams are versus where the best of the best is feels so huge. And by the time we finish this, 3-day run that we'll have in April, that gap feels so much smaller from a bunch of guys that, today, half this audience has never even heard of, and we hope that this helps them figure those guys out. But, like, these people that we're watching every Saturday are going to make such a difference in the lives of fans for the next 5 years. It's the most empowering thing in all of this to me.
It is. And think of the stories, right? Like Puka Nacua this year. I mean, you have these players that are afterthoughts almost on day 3, while people like you and I are sitting there fascinated by every selection in the 200s of the draft. And it alters every talking point. It can alter a team's long-term projection, short-term projection, fantasy football, next year's draft. There are so many storylines with the draft, and I think it's what makes it the absolute best.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Follow him on Twitter at Connor J. Rogers, of course. Check out the Badlands' his Jets podcast. It's good stuff there. And, of course, NFL Stock Exchange podcast. That's an incredible work. Check him out on NBC Sports. Man, I appreciate your time. We got to do this again, my friend.
Absolutely. I appreciate you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
It's time to hang out with my buddy, Michael Lombardi, as we do every single week. And, Michael, this is a curious thing. I want to start with a very broad topic here, but I think one of the beautiful things of this football, like I'm going to argue that maybe we haven't seen a lot of great football this year, but we see compelling results, like games come down to the wire. I'm not sure this has been a great season, but here we sit with only a few weeks left, and I feel like everything's still on the table. Like we don't know who's great. We don't know who's going to win divisions. We don't know who sucks. Like on the one hand, maybe it's like mediocrity everywhere, but to me, I don't know, there's some charm to the fact that we're this late in the season and we still haven't defined most of this.
I agree. I think when you break this season down, it's at a lot of ups and downs. And, the 3-game losing streak San Francisco had, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. And then they dominate. Buffalo, everybody wrote them off when they lost to Denver, at home. And now they've come back and they've been able to win 3 games, 3-1, should have beat Philadelphia. So, and now they have an opportunity, Fitz, to go and win the East. I mean, look, they have the Chargers, the Patriots, and Miami. So let's just say they get to 10 wins. They're 10-6. And Miami stubs their toe in 1 game over the next 2. Miami has to play Dallas and they have to play Baltimore. It's going to be hard for Miami to carry those 2 wins forward. They could. If they do, obviously, that gives them the 11 wins that they need. But they still going to have to beat Buffalo if Buffalo puts 2 wins on the scoreboard. And all of a sudden, now that game becomes really something that they've got to deal with. So Buffalo's a long way from being out of this, and they're a long way from not winning the East, too. They could do this, and especially in light of Miami's injuries, whether Hill plays or not, I think this is something to think about.
Part of what's wild to me, though, is like we've gone through this roller coaster with the Bills. Let's stick with the Bills for a second, because think about it, man. Like there was a spot where it wasn't that long ago, McDermott could be in trouble, and they fire Ken Dorsey as their offensive coordinator, and it's Josh Allen, without Brian Daboll, maybe he just isn't it. And then all of a sudden, all of it just sort of figures itself out, right? Like, and I'm not saying that the Bills are sitting here as a juggernaut, but man, when you've seen the Bills be as good as they can be, it's hard for me to write them off. And maybe it's a lesson that we shouldn't be as reactionary, not you and I, but just an overall football culture to one result 1 week. That's the toughest part of this season.
I think the biggest issue here is we don't define wins. Every win to the fan looks like a win, right? And if you're an executive in the league, there's 3 categories of every win. There's a dominating win. And that win occurs, it could be a 20-10 win, it could be a 30-10 win, but it's a game where you're watching and you won the game and the other team had no chance to win. That's a dominating win. And so how many of those do you have during your season? And then the next one, the next level is, are you able to dictate the game at some point in the game where you don't play well, but you overcome it? San Francisco, one of their losses was a dictating type loss, because had they won that game, had Moody kicked that field goal, they overcame a lot to win. So there's that loss. And then there's the dangerous loss, okay, where, the dangerous win, where you're Philadelphia and you beat Buffalo in overtime, but that was very dangerous. Buffalo could have won that game. And I think, to me, when you break down the season, if you don't put the wins in these categories, you don't really get a true perspective of the team. San Francisco's had a bunch of dominating wins. Baltimore, a bunch of dominating wins. Philly hasn't had a dominating win since week 3 of the season when they played Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay. Every other win has either been in that dictating area or that dangerous area. And to me, that tells you your team isn't as talented as you think it is.
Yeah, and that speaks to the context. That's been a big part of the conversation across all of social media this week, putting context around these games. Put context for me around Dallas and Miami, because I feel like we could call both of them frauds. So, what are we supposed to make of them at this point?
I think both of them have the ability to win. Neither team, in spite of the scoreboard, ever dominates, right? They dominate bad teams, but when they play against the good teams, they have to play perfectly. And I think both teams, really, the biggest issue with both teams is in their offensive line. I mean, Dallas goes into Buffalo, and Buffalo's defensive line comes to life. And, they're able to put pressure on Dak. They couldn't run the ball, and it took over the game. Miami, whenever they play against a good team with a front that creates some problems, there it goes. One of the reasons why Dallas hasn't played well on the road is because I truly believe this is one of my pet peeves in football. Bad lines don't travel. When you have a bad offensive line and you go on the road, you typically don't play well. Now, I think Dallas has an average line, but it becomes below average on the road. And I think Miami's the same thing. When they have to play a good team on the road, that line starts to show up and they can't really fluff their way through. So I think the winner of this game, we're going to sit there and say, well, they finally beat a good team. But my thing is, have they? Have they really beaten a good team? Are either one of these teams really good, or are they just really good offensively?
So bad lines don't travel. Why?
Because of the snap count. What's the number one advantage in all of football? The snap count, right? So when you can hear the snap count, the offense gets on the ball. When you go on the road, it's hard to hear the snap count. You're on a silent count. You're trying to figure, your linemen are a little bit more tentative. They don't come off the ball with explosiveness, right? So now the game's even. The game's even when the snap count is no longer in the favor of the offense. It then favors the defense. I mean, how many times you've watched games, Fitz, where the quarterback doesn't change the snap count and the defense gets off on the ball and they look like they're offside? Well, that's the quarterback. He hasn't changed the snap count. So now the defense's rhythm, and it gives them the advantage. So when you're a bad line and you don't have that offensive ability to get the snap count in your favor, it's a problem.
I'm telling you, like I say this every year, but I'm just going to keep chirping it all the way up to the draft. As much time as we spent talking about Drake Maye and Caleb Williams and all the quarterbacks, like that's fine. But I'm telling you, as a fan of a team, like talk to every fat guy you've ever met that's ever played offensive. There aren't enough talented offensive linemen right now to actually have 32 good offensive lines. And I genuinely believe, as much as if you have Patrick Mahomes, it gives you a chance every Sunday. I believe that. I also believe that if you had 5 hogs up front that could absolutely impose their will anytime, every time, everywhere, if you have that, man, it can make up for a lot of, like, we spend time obsessing over the beauty of the quarterback position. I think if you got fat guys up front that can eat, man, your football team's going to be a lot better than anybody thinks it's going to be.
No question. And when you have a bad line, what does the defense do? The defense always rushes 5. They never rush 3, because when you only rush 3 against a bad line, they look better. When you rush 5, that means all 5 guys have to block one-on-one, and bad lines can't block one-on-one.
I keep going back to the conversations I've had with big boys about, communication on the line and all the things that come into it. It's an intrigue. I get why we don't break it down hardcore on college prospects, because it's hard to break down. I would just implore fans to look at it. Also hard to break down is the MVP race. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because yesterday I had the chance to talk to 2 MVP voters, right? Inside Coverage, we've got Jory Epstein, she's a voter, and we've got Charles Robinson, he's a voter. And it was interesting because I really walked away from it understanding how everybody sees it differently. And I'll give you the same analogy I gave them. I've been lucky enough to be a Grammy voter for a while in my life. Every Grammy voter sees that differently, right? That process differently. What do you value as a musician? Like, I value having commercial success, for example. I think if you've made a memory for somebody that will last for 50 years, there is value, even if it's not the greatest art, right? So, but not everybody sees it the same. So let's go to you as somebody that's been around in the league. First and foremost, when I say MVP to you, what's the most important thing that you consider in that process?
He plays above the level of expectation for the position, and it contributes towards winning. You can't be 3-13, but you could be 10-7 and be the MVP, because if you weren't on that field and doing things that are unheard of, you might not be able to, your team might not have won 10 games. So it's raising the level of play and posting numbers that are unheard of in the annals of the league, and every week be consistent. Some people can have, and I think the Hall of Fame does this, we vote players into the Hall of Fame that have had Hall of Fame seasons, not Hall of Fame careers. And the MVP has had to have 16 to 17 games of high-level performance for me.
So that takes Dak out of your equation, I'm presuming, correct?
Yeah, well, I think Dak is certainly in the play, but I don't think he's been consistent enough in terms of his play over the year. And finishing second to Hurts in the conference, if they're not able to win the East, I think that affects them. If Dak was truly the MVP, they win the East.
So then I think about Heisman moments all the time, the phrase we use in college football. It feels like Ravens 49ers Christmas Day. That just feels like a Heisman moment, like Lamar versus Purdy. Am I putting too much weight into that game?
No, because I think which team wins, their quarterback has to play at a very high level. And Purdy's numbers you have to go back to Kurt Warner in 2000 to find a quarterback who averages almost 10 yards per attempt passing. Think about that. Daniel Jones at the Giants has never averaged over 7 yards per attempt passing. This kid's 3 yards above him. Think about that. I mean, that's significant. It's one of the most important stats for quarterbacks, yards per attempt, not yards per completion, yards per attempt. And he's at a high level. To be a great team, you have to have that number above 7.6. To be a legitimate Super Bowl playing team, you have to. And if you can't get there, what does that tell us? You're not making enough big plays down the field. You're not making explosive pass plays. And this kid, Purdy's done it. His accuracy is unbelievable. His deep balls are great. His decision-making is outstanding. Look, if Trevor Lawrence was doing this for San Francisco and he was playing there, and because he was the first pick overall in the draft, we'd all be saying, oh, my God. But Trevor Lawrence doesn't even come close to these numbers.
It's going to be interesting because I think the Purdy conversation isn't going anywhere. It's only rising. It's the last time I'm talking to you before Christmas, Michael Lombardi. I was thinking about you. I was thinking about you because, I poured myself a little drink the other day, put a little Bing on, had a little Christmas music, and I was like, man, Lombardi's just a classy man of the people. What's the go-to Christmas music for the Lombardi household? What are you putting on?
Well, we're going to put the Rat Pack on. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. It's going to be something from that era, whether it's Dean, whether it's Frank, whether it's Sammy, whether it's Perry Como, whether it's somebody on that line. It's going to be some oldness, Nat King Cole. It's going to be some of that. Have some good Jack Daniels, Frank Sinatra Select, which is outstanding. Jack Daniels made a certain brand for Sinatra because he brought so much to the table. So, yeah, it's always good. It's always good at Christmas. Give a lot of thanks. I have a lot to be grateful for. I have 5 great grandchildren, great wife, great career. So I'm pretty thankful for everything. So it'll be a great day. And look, I was thinking of you the other night too. I went and saw Billy Joel, 74 years old, still playing. Still making it happen. With a lot of the guys that were in the band when I saw them when I was a teenager back in Long Island out at Nassau Coliseum.
Man, to do it at the level he does it at still with his show hasn't suffered. There's some legends that get on stage and you're like, yeah, your best years are behind you. That is not Billy Joel. Like, he's still out there giving it. I mean, it's pretty wild.
His voice was outstanding. It was the best. I think it was one of the best I've heard him. And it was a great show. Elvis Costello joined him for a couple tunes on stage. And it was amazing. This was the 79th, I think, consecutive sellout in his residency at the Garden. And, he hasn't written a new song since River of Dreams.
That's crazy.
And yet we all stand up. And when he plays Vienna, we all know the words and we all enjoy it.
Yeah, well, as you know, as an appreciator of music, like when you've written some of the best, you don't have to keep doing it. You can just live on the best that you've written for sure. I will raise a glass on Christmas Eve when Sinatra comes on in the house because that's inevitable. It always does. It feels like vinyl. Like I need actual like the hiss of a record player, and Rat Pack that screams Christmas to me, my friend. I'm glad that we've been able to do this every week and be able to continue this friendship, which we will throughout the course of the new year. But Merry Christmas, happy holidays to you and yours. I hope you enjoy the season.
Thank you, Fitz. Same to you.
Don't forget, check out Michael hosting the Lombardi Line, which airs on VSiN weekdays 1 p.m. Eastern, weekends 10 a.m. Eastern, as well as his weekly GM Shuffle podcast. You can check out all of Michael's NFL takes on VSiN. That's VSIN, VSiN.com. I'm back Sunday night with Frank for Sunday Night Blitz. You never want to miss that. Yeah, even on Christmas Eve, Frank Schwab and I are going to be talking about football. That's right. Might have some eggnog. Follow me on Twitter at Jason Fitz. Thanks to all of our guests coming on. Follow Stone, too, doing God's work behind the glass at SJ Rochelle. Leave us that 5-star review. Rate, subscribe. Tell your friends, your family, your enemies, and everybody to hang out with us every single week. We'll be back next Thursday with more Zero Blitz.